Hello everyone, Infinity Gamer here. This is a battle report for Shasvastii versus O12, both out of the Wildfire set pretty much with a couple of pseudos, and I really enjoyed this because I've played O12 a couple of times. I actually knew my opponent's army a little bit, which was good. I kind of knew what to expect. Shasvastii, I had not played that yet. It seemed quite complicated on paper with strange deployments and camo tokens and mines and things like that. So I thought, I've had a couple of games, I know the basics about orders, things like that. I've seen fire teams being used, and I've quite fancied giving that a go as well. So yeah, I just thought I'd whip out the Shasvastii, give that its first run. So I'm going to make loads of mistakes. Again, if you notice any, please put them in the comments. Some of you have been really good with doing that, and it does help me learn every time. So I really do appreciate it. As for lists, this was his list. Again, I'm very familiar with most of it. Nothing really shocking here. I don't know who the lieutenant is and things like that because it's not my list. But yeah, pretty good setup as far as I know. Interested to see how he uses some of these models because it's very similar to a list I've run. With my list, I've got the Mentor with a Shock Marksman's Rifle as my lieutenant, and then also a Shrouded. I've got 3 Nox units, 2 of which are paramedics and 1 is a forward observer. And the Caliban, which starts in hidden deployment with a mine. It's got Spitfire and decharges. The Guelo with heavy rocket launcher. I'm really excited to use the Guelo actually because it's got the nano bot thingies, which is like armor protection, I think, or -3. He's also got MSV 2, I think. So and with a heavy rocket launcher, I'm just kind of hoping that he can kill a lot of things, really. That's my hope. Cadmus is a little bit sneaky. I didn't understand it hugely when I read it about its seed embryo deployment. So I'm excited to give that a go. And my Speculo, which I obviously don't have a model for, and I end up using an Elder Fire Dragon as a pseudo because it's also an S2 profile. So that works quite well. So then you can see my list. Yep, Shasvastii Tactical Monitoring Company, Mentor as my lieutenant. This is a, oh crikey, what's the word for it? A sectorial list, I think. Sorry, please correct me if I'm wrong with that. But yeah, and which means that I can have things like fire teams, which I hadn't used before. So I did a little bit of research about fire teams beforehand. And what I've learned is that the more members that you have in your fire team, the different responses you can have. So you can do things like when you ARO, instead of it just being 1 shot, which is typical for an ARO, burst 1, you get 2. You add an additional burst to your fire team leader, and a couple of things like that. But then, unfortunately, as you lose members of your fire team, you also lose those benefits as well. So very keen to learn more about fire teams. So that's partly why I'm excited about using the sectorial Shasvastii list. So yeah, I'm excited about using that. In terms of the battlefield, we're using quite a lot of the terrain from the Wildfire set, and also some that Bryn, who's a lovely guy, has been teaching me how to play Infinity. He's got a whole bunch of terrain as well. I like the Wildfire terrain. 3 mil thick card. It looks beautiful. It's quite durable. Yeah, I think Corvus Belli did a very, very good job with that. So yeah, I won't wax too much lyrical about scenery, but let's just say it's better than quite a lot of games starter sets. We play countermeasures again. I've now done countermeasures twice. I've enjoyed it each time actually because I actually quite like the randomness of the cards. Because I don't really have a strategy when I go into a game, the cards actually help poke me in a direction. They kind of make me do stuff, and because they're also set things that they're asking you to do, like revive a trooper, I get to learn how to do that too. So even though a lot of people, I think, based on some comments that I've seen on some of the Facebook pages, don't like countermeasures, probably because it's random, and when you do have a strategy, that's quite frustrating. For me as a learner, I actually quite enjoy it. It's quite good for a learning experience. So we draw the missions before we actually do our whip rolls. I don't think it ends up factoring anything in, and I'm not sure if that's the normal way, but anyway. So this is what we had. We had Extreme Prejudice, we had HVT Kidnapping, and we had Follow-Up. I hadn't seen Extreme Prejudice the previous time, but I was reading about coup de grace things because I was researching, I think it's the Cadmus or the Caliban, and again, please forgive me if I'm incorrect. And they've got a scavenger special skill I was reading, And I think what that is that when you are in close combat with something, you can choose to steal a weapon, any weapon that they have. Not an ability. I think you can steal equipment, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But when you do scavenge from them, you do a coup de grace kind of kill. So if they were in an unconscious state, it means that they go straight to a dead or a killed state. So again, was quite excited to draw that card because I had just been reading about it, so it wasn't completely alien. So in terms of whip rolls, I won the whip roll. My mentor had a whip of 14, and I think his would have had about 13. I seem to remember when I was playing O12 that most of them had 13s. I found this mechanic odd, and it's something that when I play the competition in April, I'm going to have to get my head around, is that you obviously have to say I won without necessarily saying, but obviously if they roll a 13, which is the normal level for a whip, and you go, sorry, I beat you, they know it's a 14, and an experienced player will actually probably know which model you're using as your lieutenant then. So yeah, I'm a bit nervous about that, I'm not going to lie. So my opponent, so I chose to go first, which meant that my opponent chose deployment sides and deployment order. I was pushed down to the bottom, and he chose the top half of the map. And he ended up deploying first, which I'm not sure would be a normal strategy, so I think he was maybe trying to be kind to me as a learner. So then from a deployment standpoint, O12 deployment was first, which is good. And I'll quickly run you through who he deployed, where he deployed them, and kind of a rough idea of facing so that you might be able to keep track of what happened and why it happened. So the first model that he deployed was the Gamma, which he ended up being his data tracker, but we both kind of forgot for my first turn who were data trackers. I don't think it would have really changed the result, but yeah, so the Gamma has a good V firing arc. You might just be able to see it, but basically down towards the bottom left, there's a bit of a channel, and then down towards the bottom right where the bright red container is, there's a bit of a channel there. So parking the Gamma there was actually really, really smart. Something I didn't appreciate until later, just how good a placement that was really. Yeah, so you can see down one of the channels, and you can also see he's guarding the one of his HVTs down there. So yeah, really smart placement there from my opponent. Something that I appreciated and tried to learn from as much as possible. The next model he deployed was the Varangian, again, kind of covering the back of the Gamma, which was pretty sensible, just parked on the corner. Then next, again, around the same building was Team Sirius, facing the opposite way. So again, covering good arcs, really. I mean, I think he knew that I had the Speculoso, knew I could basically bring something in anywhere. So I wanted to at least make sure that if I did drop it anywhere near there, something would be able to cover it. One thing you won't be able to see from a deployment point of view is inside that building. I'll try and mention it later, but that building becomes quite important later on in the game. Old Epsilon, one of my favourite models from the O12. He's had a mixed bag, has had 2 real hot games for me, and then one that didn't go so well. So I'm a little bit scared of him. Chances are my opponent will roll slightly hotter than I did with him. So yeah, he starts on top of the rooftop, prone, because as you'll notice, there's not actually a lot of cover up there, but he does want the option to be able to pop out and do stuff. The 3 Kappas. So the first one deploys in the building that we were just looking at with the Varangian Team Sirius kind of nearby. So yeah, just in the doorway looking out to kind of cover the backs of everything that was there. The next Kappa is the forward observer guy. He's kind of down on I call him forward observer guy because I'm giving away if anyone ever plays against me in my O12, but I generally use him as a forward observer because he looks as though he's forward observing. So it's easy for me to remember. So he's kind of just parked around a building really. Then the final Kappa is again just kind of parked at the back in a building. My opponent did tell me about the strategy to intentionally make it confusing as to who is lieutenant. It's likely to be a Kappa, but he said he's going to deploy them all as though they could be. So I'm not really reading too much into that. Gangbuster is forward a little bit in the grey area because he has infiltrate, and then deploys some mad traps kind of near and around him. So you can kind of see the Gangbuster there, again guarding another HVT, which is incredibly sensible. So I think that's all of it. Oh yeah, and then the Delta is in AD drop. I think he runs the hacker version of the Delta. But then he calls it Delta Doctor, so I think he actually ran as a Delta Doctor, but that's just my memory failing me. So then in terms of my deployment, this is where I knew I'd get quite confused with Shasvastii, because they've got so much in camo. I'm not really sure about how you deploy 2 camo tokens at once, remember them, and then reveal the correct unit, especially when one's a mine. Some are almost like hollows, so some are fake versions of your model. So yeah, I knew I'd get this wrong. I asked a lot of questions, gave a little bit away, but learned a lot from it. So I deploy my Guelo to that back corner, kind of with line of sight to the Gamma, because I feel like with camo and the nanobots, he might be hardy and durable. And I also know I'm going first, so I albedo. That's the thing I'm thinking of, not camo. Albedo. So, which is better, I think. I think camo gets countered by some things. Albedo doesn't. Again, I will refresh my memory on the rules, but it's been a little while since this game was done. Again, looking down that channel towards the Gamma because I think I can get a couple of shots in on him. The Caliban, I deploy poorly. Those are those 2 camo tokens that you see down there. The one on the left is the mine, and the one on the right is the Caliban itself, which is an error. I should have put the mine down on the floor and put the Caliban somewhere else. I really fluffed that deployment and learned a lot, because the mine up there isn't really going to do much, whereas on the ground, it stands more of a chance. So yeah, that was a bit poor. AD combat drop the Cadmus. I've got plans for him. Then the Mentor I deploy in the building on the far right-hand corner. And then my Nox troopers, which I've got 2 paramedics and a forward observer, I basically surround the Mentor with, so that he's a little bit protected. With the Mentor, I only deploy the 1 camo token, and I feel like I actually should have done 2. So again, lessons learned. This is only my 3rd game, so making mistakes, but learning from them, I hope. I shouldn't make the same mistake twice. Oh, the Shrouded I really mess up. So I try and do an infiltrate drop into his side, because I'm basically running out of space for him to be useful. I try and deploy him there. My opponent basically says, no one does this, don't do it. You're going to make a terrible mistake. I fluff my whip roll, and he basically ends up behind the Guelo. So I might not do it in the future. Countermeasures always makes me struggle because of the deployment type. I can't use infiltrate very well, and things like this go wrong for me. And so I just tried to do something different, and yeah, fluffed it massively. So he didn't deploy his mine at the same time in the end. So yeah, and then I combat drop the Speculo Killer. All right, first turn for Shasvastii. So, looking at the terrain, things are pretty spread out. I don't have a plan. I think I'm basically just going to try. Last time I made the mistake where I basically just tried to kill things and thought that was what was going to win the game for me. This time I've changed tack. I'm focusing a little bit more on the mission cards, and I'm going to see what I can go with. I don't really think HVT kidnapping is good. Even HVT designation, I might struggle with that. And I don't really have a plan as to how I can get extreme prejudice until I remember that the Speculo can basically deploy anywhere. So I drop the Speculo in the building at the back, which is surrounded, if you remember, by things like the Varangian, Team Sirius, and the Kappa in the door, which is what I'm eyeing up, because I'm hoping I can stay sheltered from the Sirius and the Varangian that's on the outside, and get away with getting a coup de grace kill on the Kappa. Things do not go well. So I shoot the Kappa, thinking that that's going to be my best chance of maybe getting it unconscious, but also worried that I'm going to kill it. I end up underdoing it, don't do any damage to the Kappa at all, but catch the Varangian in the background, which ends up working out really nicely because I kill the Varangian, who I never had any plans for, and it would just be in the way and annoying. But the Kappa stays alive. So I get bored of, I spend about 4 orders trying to kill the Kappa and fail miserably. So I end up changing tack and go, do you know what, let's have some fun with the Guelo, who I basically want to move forward and also pop a shot at the Gamma at the same time. He goes over the barricade, shoots at the Gamma. Things don't go particularly well. The Gamma's AROs go quite well. My shooting does not. And the net result, basically, is that nothing happens to the Gamma, and my Guelo is unconscious turn 1, having spent 1 order and moved 4 inches. So less than ideal. Back in the building, so what happens? I finally get into face-to-face contact with the Kappa, and finally knock it unconscious, and then spend another order doing a coup de grace kill. So that is fantastic. So from a mission point of view, I get extreme prejudice, which puts me 1 point up, which I'm very happy at. Then the Cadmus, I decided to drop him in as well. So put down 3 spawn tokens, with that one on the outside being the real Cadmus. I basically don't have a plan for it, but I'm kind of using it as a bit of a distraction. That and the Speculo in the building, I can hopefully tie up things like his Epsilon Sirius and make them think twice before they actually start doing anything. So at the end, I'm basically then going to go for HVT designation. I've only got about 2 orders left. One of my Noxes over the very far end of the corner is a forward observer. That HVT is just sticking out, which means that I can get line of sight to it. It's a long shot. I'm at like -6, but and I have to spend 2 orders to do it. But I get it both times and get mission accomplished on target designation. So that puts me at 2-0 at the end of the first turn, which I think is a pretty strong start.
So as we head into my opponent's turn 1, playing O12, these are the mission cards that we end up with. So we've got we've got 8 rescue, which is basically a trooper that must be in a Kazakh state with an allied trooper that is totally inside its own half of the game table. And it says at the end of the game, but I've been informed that this was changed in a lot of ITS missions to basically be at the end of the round or end of turn, that sort of thing. And then there's a bonus if at the end of the game the trooper in Kazakh state and the allied trooper are both fully inside the enemy's half of the table. So difficult to get at this stage because there hasn't been a lot of movement. I mean, I should be able to get that if I can, if the Speculo dies or the Cadmus dies, and I can revive them, but that's not the situation we have at the moment. So HVT kidnapping, and then in extremis recovery. So yeah, interesting missions. I quite like all of them really. I'm not sure which one he's going to go for. So what is it? So, and in terms of the current state of play, obviously I've got my Guelo is unconscious on the far left hand side of the table, having done sweet FA in his turn. So much promise, and unfortunately I didn't play him very well. But from his side, the losses are the Kappa that was inside the building and the Varangian that was on the outside of the building. So that's it. So Hippolyta has to do her impetuous move first. So basically jumps up on top of the building, over the wall, and tries to run. I think we determine that the seed embryos for the Cadmus are not a target. And I think we go that I think we forget about the Speculo. And so basically runs straight for the Nox. So I think we actually played that wrong a little bit. Team Sirius come around the corner. They basically so my opponent tries to line up as many of the embryos as possible with the Sirius bot so that a well-placed shotgun template should get them all. Unfortunately, can only get, I say unfortunately, this is unfortunately for him, not for me, can only get the first one and that back one in the shot. I basically say, well, I don't know how to play it, so I just say, you shoot, the first one is the Cadmus, so can we resolve that properly? Can I reveal in ARO? We resolve the shooting, the Cadmus's chest mines go off, which are very, very fun. I did enjoy using those. And the net result is that the Cadmus is in an unconscious state, and the Sirius bot is in a dead state. But I feel like that was a great strategy from his side of things, because he sacrificed one model to reveal who the Cadmus was and then ultimately take him out of action. So I feel like that went quite well for him. To move the Gangbuster and his Mad Traps, they basically move up to the corner that you can kind of see there, and then moves the Mad Traps up more significantly. I think he's trying to tempt me with the Mad Traps to reveal, I think, is it the Caliban that's maybe at that corner? So I decide to do nothing, so idle, see what he does, and then he tries to discover the Caliban. So he fails to discover the Caliban, which is obviously a good result, and then puts the Gangbuster in suppressive fire, which is pretty scary stuff. That Hippo token just means that the Caliban is my data tracker. Then talking of Hippo, he super jumps Hippo onto the top of the building and is basically gunning for that HVT. During the jump, she decides to shoot at my injured Cadmus, which is currently in a glued and unconscious state, and kills it completely. At this stage, I'm really confused. I don't know why that was done, but there's probably a plan afoot. I reveal the Caliban so that I can ARO Hippo because I don't want him getting the HVT. And then obviously I do shooting with the Nox, who also have line of sight, and they get their extra burst for being in a fire team, which is fantastic fun. However, I also shoot from the Shrouded, who, if you remember, is way across the other side of the table. Everything misses, nothing important happens. A Hippo gets into base-to-base contact with the HVT and pulls it from the battlefield. So that is, from a mission point of view, HVT kidnapping complete. Now, originally I thought that killing the Cadmus was a little bit odd, and I still don't really understand why. But we actually looked in Extremis Recovery, which seemed like a perfect one to get the Cadmus. But the terminology is slightly different here. It says spawn embryo, enemy trooper, whereas I think the Cadmus is seed embryo, as you can see there on the data sheet. So kind of realised that I wasn't going to be able to get that one, so less important. So at the end of that turn, the O12 turn 1, it is 2-1 with me in the lead, which is an odd thing for me to be experiencing. So then going into the Shasvastii turn 2, my turn 2, these are the cards that we have. So Rescue's still there, then In Extremis Recovery's still there, and then HVT Identity Check is the new one that gets pulled to replace the one that he got. I decided I don't like the look of HVT Identity Check, maybe because in my last game I tried to get it and failed epically. So instead there's HVT Espionage, which is a hacker within the enemy HVT model in his zone of control, must spend a short skill and win a whip roll. I don't have any hackers, I don't think. So yeah, that's going to be a bit tricky for me to get. So I decided to move the Shrouded around the barrier to get into base-to-base contact with the Guelo, with the intention that I'm going to go for Rescue. Now, I do get an ARO from the Gamma that's sitting at the end of that corridor, which is obviously scary because he's already popped off the Guelo, who I thought was a little bit more able to withstand that sort of stuff. I choose to dodge because in the back of my mind, I'm like, if I succeeded, I'm slightly short of being in base-to-base contact, but if I succeed to dodge, that's a free 2-inch movement that I get on top of everything. I'm not sure that I should have done that because I think with dodge you've got to go towards cover, and I don't know that going behind a friendly unit, it counts as cover, so maybe I may have cheated a little bit by doing this, but I successfully dodged the Gamma, don't get hit, and move the additional 2 inches to be in base-to-base contact with the Guelo. I succeed in doing the Kazovac roll, which means that I luckily managed to get mission accomplished on Rescue, which is the top one. So a trooper must be in the Kazovac state with an allied trooper that is totally inside his own half of the game table, and outside his own deployment zone at the end of the game, which, as we know, means turn. So, yay, got that one, which is fantastic. So then I feel like I could make In Extremis Recovery with the Speculo because it's quite close to some enemy models. So what I do is I pop the Speculo out of the building, and unfortunately, so even though the female member of the Team Sirius has her back to me, unfortunately the Epsilon is close. I'm there thinking I'm in too short a range for the sniper rifle to really be any good. And then I discover that he has a nanopulsar, which turns out to be fun. So I split fire between the Team Sirius, what remains of it, and the Epsilon. And I'm thinking, oh, fantastic, I've got a shotgun. It'd be fantastic to get the Epsilon out of the way. Unfortunately, don't kill the Epsilon. Do knock the Team Sirius unconscious. And then, unfortunately, my Speculo, not a fire dragon from 40k, but the Speculo falls unconscious. So then I choose to use the auto medikit on the Speculo, which I realise is kind of foolish because by spending an order, the Epsilon will still get to ARO. Auto medikit, that succeeds. The Epsilon does his shooting ARO, but doesn't kill the fire dragon, Speculo. So I then move the Speculo forward to try and get into base-to-base contact with the remaining Team Sirius, who is now unconscious. And even though I get to move, I then unfortunately cop some ARO shooting from the Epsilon, which puts me unconscious again. Now, I can auto-medikit as many times as I like, so obviously what I then do is, with my next turn, I try and auto-medikit because I feel like I am outside of his line of fire, so at least this time I won't get an ARO against me. Unfortunately, sod's law, that attempt to auto-medikit kills the Speculo, or it fails, so he stays unconscious. So even though I would have been uncontested with that one, unfortunately it doesn't go off and I can't complete my mission. So then that signals the end of my turn, and at 3-1, I think I've done pretty well. A little bit disappointed to have not gotten the Speculo in base-to-base contact with the Team Sirius to try and get an additional point ahead. But yeah, things seem to be going reasonably well. I don't know that I'd change a lot of what I did. So then going into O12, turn 2, the missions that we've got are still the same: data scan, HVT espionage, and in extremis recovery. And he seems to feel like he can get those, so leaves them unchanged. So the first thing in his turn is obviously the impetuous move from the Hippolyta. So she moves forwards. The 2 Nox troopers can see her, and also the Caliban over the other side of the road. So they all try and ARO. She actually does a move and then does an eclipse. All of the shooting fails and the eclipse fails to go off. So basically a fat load of nothing happens. Then a lot of things happen because there's a coordinated move with the Gangbuster as the spearhead. So Hippo moves, the Gangbuster moves, I think Kappa moves and the Gamma moves, but the Gangbuster and Hippo are the only ones that really get seen. So the Noxes shoot Hippo, the Mentor reveals himself and shoots the Gangbuster, and the Caliban shoots at Hippo as well. The Noxes get 2 hits on Hippo, and she takes 2 wounds, but because or 1 wound, but because of no wound incapacitation, basically nothing happens. However, Hippo manages to fire a shotgun at that big group of units there and knocks out one of my Noxes and the Mentor. Hippo takes some extra arrows, dies, but then the Gangbuster gets to move up as part of another move, pretty much uncontested because the Mentor and the Nox that could see him are now unconscious. Then the Delta arrives, and things don't go very well for my Shrouded. So the Delta arrives behind the Shrouded and kills it straight away, then goes into base-to-base contact with the Guelo and manages to complete in extremis recovery and also data scan at the same time, because I think it does data scan first and then does in extremis recovery. So yeah, great result for basically the Delta, and then takes out those 2 models there. So as a recap for what he has and where, the Delta is now on the far left, causing me a pain. The Gangbuster's kind of sitting in the middle of the table, just to the left there. Then there's an additional Kappa that has been moved up on the left-hand side. There's a Kappa at the back that's still alive. The Gamma is obviously being a pain still at the back there. We still have the Epsilon sitting on the rooftop there. And then we've got an unconscious Sirius team member in there. I've got 2 Nox troopers still alive there, an unconscious Mentor and an unconscious Nox. My Caliban is still alive in the centre of the table, but that's pretty much all I have left, so not gone too well for me. So at the end of that turn, it is 3-all, thanks to his amazing scoring. So going into my turn 3, things aren't going amazingly well. Points-wise, we're even, but he's definitely got more options in terms of troops still on the table. So yeah, that hasn't gone amazingly well for me. When I look at the missions, I draw experimental drug and mapping, and there's HVT inoculation. So I think mapping is a result of me not liking the middle card, and so getting that as a new one. So I'm thinking that I can do experimental drug because I've got lots of unconscious troopers around the base. But I'm also suffering from a loss of lieutenant situation, which has happened to me every game so far. And so I'd love to have an NCO, which I've been told is basically there's kind of like a chain of command thing. So if you lose your lieutenant, what typically happens is that all of your orders then go to irregular orders, which means instead of having a pool that you can spend on loads of different models, each order generated by a model has to be spent on that model, which is obviously a huge pain. You can use command tokens to turn one of those irregular orders into like a regular one and spend it on another. But what would be much more helpful is if I just didn't suffer loss of lieutenant pretty much every time I play this game. So yes, an NCO would be fantastic. O12 have an alpha unit, which hasn't got a model yet, but you can pseudo in something else for it. And I need to just look at, there are a couple, I think, for Shasvastii, but I'll just double check. So obviously I'll go for experimental drug as quickly as possible, and I've got options. So 2 of my Noxes were paramedics, and the other was a forward observer. Luckily, one of those paramedics survived, so I rush the Nox over to the Mentor and get into base-to-base contact and revive him. So that means I get experimental drug pretty much straight off the bat, which is excellent. I move the Mentor up onto the top of the building to try and get a shot in at the Epsilon, because he's got a shock marksman's rifle, so I think, that could be good going against another marksman. But unfortunately, in the balance of things, the Mentor ends up dying and nothing happens to the Epsilon, so fantastic. So even though I lost the Mentor to a crit from the Epsilon, the Caliban then decides to move to tuck into cover, gets an ARO from the Epsilon, and then decides to shoot at the Epsilon. Luckily, the Caliban replaces the favour, crits the Epsilon, which puts him unconscious, and the Caliban suffers no damage. So all in all, not terrible. So at the end of my turn 3, I am at 4-3. So got the lead, but it's his final turn, which obviously means that he's got all the control and power to try and turn it around. And I feel like with the cards that come up for the final mission, so obviously with me getting that one, we then replace it with Net Undermine, which is a trooper whose troop classification is veteran or elite troops, or a trooper possessing the chain of command special skill must spend a short skill and succeed a whip roll while totally inside the enemy's half of the table, which I think he can do, because he's got like the Delta pretty close, the Gangbuster's pretty close, so yeah, that might not be as hard for him as it would have been for me. Certainly got options for being able to get Net Undermine. The Delta is not far from my territory at all, so that's as far as we would have to go. So yeah, I feel like Net Undermine is definitely going to be the one he ends up going for. So what he does is he launches into another coordinated movement with the Delta, Gangbuster, Kappa and Gamma. So obviously gives himself options, as the Delta and the Gangbuster are both within reach of being able to get that. Doesn't take long, and yeah, the Delta is the one that gets Net Undermine just by jumping into my territory. Another coordinated move with the same characters, Delta, Gangbuster, Kappa and Gamma. The Gangbuster ends up going around the building. I can see that they're coming for the Caliban. The Gamma tries to come around the corner and have a shot, and then the Delta's kind of heading that way as well. And then the Gangbuster's going around the building behind, so I'm a little bit worried as to what's going on. A lot of things are happening. Now, in terms of AROs, the Caliban can only see the Gamma at this stage, and that was intentional. The placement from my opponent was such that the Delta wouldn't be able to see, while the Gangbuster is sending some mad traps behind me and is generally concerning me heavily. And with Net Undermine done, he then manages to achieve mapping, which is annoying, and he does that to basically close up the game, because we were tied, and now it's 4-5. So victory to O12, which is fantastic for my opponent, and a nice close game. So I'm not actually too disappointed to have lost, really. I felt I was in the running for a while. I made some silly mistakes, but I also learned heaps. The Speculo was great fun to use. The Cadmus was also good fun. I love just putting units in someone else's deployment and messing things up a little bit. Obviously messed up the Shrouded. I didn't really use the Mentor, and I didn't use the Caliban heavily, apart from for shooting, and definitely misplaced the mine. So generally, great fun. Again, I've got to thank the guy I'm playing against. That's now his third time he's played against me, and has been fantastic in terms of trying to educate me each and every time. I am enjoying Infinity a huge amount, so much more than I ever did 40k. There are complexities to it, but every game has that. The models are fantastic to play with. The crits are both fantastic when you get them, and terrible when they're against you. So it is a fantastic mechanism. I love the idea of orders, and I've just got to really tidy up, I think, how I use the synergy between some of the models. I mean, I had two models there that had MSV1 but didn't deploy smoke, which would have obviously been helpful. I'm not very good at strategic level planning on these sorts of missions, which I need to get better at, and some of that will just come from understanding the models slightly better. And now that I'm not having to think about every rule every time I move a model, then that's fantastic. Fire teams, honestly, I really enjoy those. Those are useful when you are suffering AROs, to have that extra burst. It kind of makes your opponent think twice. So I'm now unsure as to whether I'm going to kind of progress with O12 as my main list, or whether I'm going to go with Shasvastii. They were really fun and a bit more durable, because they've got things like mimetism and camo. When my opponents were shooting at them, they weren't as easy to kill, as I was finding with O12. So I don't know, maybe it's just, obviously I'm a bit of an immature player anyway. O12 probably has some finesse to it that I don't understand, but in order, in terms of being able to slap an army down on the table and have it as durable as possible, I've definitely looked at Shasvastii and just gone, yes, there's a trade-off because there's huge amounts of complexity, but there is also enough defensive mechanisms there that you can survive if you are a relative newbie. So I don't know. I'm going to obviously try and play them both fairly equally, so that just before the tournament I have in April, I've got some options, and I can go into that with what I feel is the best list possible. Thank you so much again to just the general Infinity community in Australia and New Zealand. You've all been fantastic when I've had questions to ask.
It isn't easy learning this game, and I've been so lucky to have so much support from local players who have actually taken to the table with me, and also the online community who have answered some questions, and also the people leaving comments on these videos. Thank you for correcting the mistakes I've made and when I've gotten rules wrong. Thank you so much, everybody, and look out for the next video when it comes.